As the intentional or unintentional dismissal of pre-Adam Peters era players continues this offseason, we take a look at how the NFL draft might shake out if even more are getting replaced, with one perhaps surprise AP era player being left out of the fun in 2025. That coming up on today's Mock Draft Monday episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders. I'm your host, David Harrison, here with you Monday through Friday, your friend, your eyes, your ears on the ground, covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com and locally for WUSA9.com. I want to thank you for coming through today for this Mock Draft Monday episode. We're going to get a little bit out of the box here. Again, mock drafts are always determined or always intended to kind of explore the what ifs of the NFL draft world. They're not necessarily always 100%. This is my prediction, all the kind of stuff. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with this Mock Draft Monday every day. There's those of you who come through every single day. I appreciate you for coming through. And anybody out there, if you're not already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode. Speaking of YouTube, we hit over 13,000 subs on YouTube over the weekend. So I greatly appreciate everybody out there who is subscribed. Greatly appreciate everybody out there who just clicked the subscribe button again, as we try to work towards that 14,000 subscription threshold. If you're new to the show, thank you for finding us. Hopefully you enjoy it. Locked On Commanders is a daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hopefully you like it, you come back, and you check us out even more. Remaining Ron Rivera era players. That is going to be the subject of this week's mock draft. Now, there's a little bit of a caveat to this, okay? Guys who were brought in by Ron Rivera but have gotten a new deal or an extension from Adam Peters are now considered Adam Peters guys, okay? And again, to kind of recap, if you watch the last episode every day or you're going to hear this, Dan Quinn said, listen, every one of these guys is my guy. Doesn't matter if we brought him in, doesn't matter if they were already here, doesn't matter. They're all my guys. And I truly believe Dan Quinn means that when he says it. So I want to be clear here. We're just talking about Ron Rivera guys, Adam Peters guys, in an easy way to separate the people that this regime has inherited and the people this regime brought in or decided to keep even after inheriting them from Ron Rivera. So when you look at the remaining Ron Rivera guys, you've got wide receiver Terry McLaurin, guard Chris Paul, right tackle Andrew Wiley could be considered a DQ guy, an AP guy now because he didn't get a new deal, but he did get a reworked deal where the Washington Commanders turned his completely non-guaranteed contract into some guaranteed money. And if you heard Deebo Samuel talk about doing that kind of thing, it means a lot to these guys. So you could kind of put him on the threshold there being an AP guy. Personally, I put him over the line. He's an AP guy now, not a Ron Rivera guy, but you could debate that if you really want to. Tight end Cole Turner, running back Brian Robinson Jr., defensive tackle Daron Payne, defensive end Andre Jones Jr., safety Percy Butler, safety Quan Martin. Those are your remaining Ron Rivera guys who were drafted, brought in by Ron Rivera or re-signed by Ron Rivera, whatever it is, they're on the team because Ron Rivera decided they would be on the team, right? So the question that came up in the mailbag episode that we wrapped up last week with was if the Washington Commanders continue to kind of go through this process of replacing those players. Again, it's been said that they're not doing that necessarily with intention. And listen, they've re-signed some of these guys. They brought back Jeremy Reeves. They brought back Tress Way. They re-signed or they extended Sam Cosmi, right? There's been plenty of guys who were here before Adam Peters who are still here now through extensions or new deals or whatever. So, you know, there's plenty of that going on. But if we want to entertain this idea of continuing to see who they could be replacing through this year's NFL draft, I think when you talk about the order of need or the order of importance or how early you might want to look at replacing a guy, right? Like you're not going to look to replace Cole Turner, a depth tight end, with a first round pick, right? You're going to look at replacing him with a depth tight end as well. So going through the list, right? First off is starting running back. If you're going to replace these guys, you got to start with the starting running back because Brian Robinson Jr. is in a contract year. Oh, by the way, his veteran backup, Austin Ekeler, also in a contract year. None of the other backups, Jeremy McNichols, Chris Rodriguez Jr., and Michael Wiley, as of right now, look like they have number one back potential. Pro Football Focus has speculated that Brian Robinson Jr. is actually the team's most valuable trade chip the PFF mock draft simulator would actually tell you differently. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Then starting defensive tackle, right? Daron Payne could be a trade target. Now, we did do that in our mock draft last week because I've had a few insiders come through, a few other fans through YouTube and Twitter kind of say like, hey, what about the possibility of Daron Payne being traded? Because, again, balled out for his contract year, got his new contract from Ron Rivera. Ever since then, a lot of people have been a little disappointed in the way that he played. So Jonathan Allen gets shipped out or gets released. Perhaps Daron Payne could be on the trade block as well. Otherwise, he's under contract through 2026. So the need to replace him, even if you are going to plan on replacing him a little bit later, you have a little bit more time because of his contract to do so if you want to. Could become an AP guy. Look, if he comes out and proves to Joe Wade Jr. that he's a valuable part of his defense here in 2025, maybe that turns the tide on things. And before the end of 2026, maybe he convinces Adam Peters and his coaching staff that he needs to be an AP guy. So, the chances are fading in my opinion, but they're still there. Johnny Newton, Javon Kinlaw combination, probably not successful enough for long-term success. So you would look to replace him in the NFL draft with a starting caliber defensive tackle if you can find one. Next up would be starting free safety. Quan Martin's under contract through 2026. I think he played pretty well. Again, wasn't a game breaker, wasn't an all-pro, nothing like that, but he also wasn't like the worst guy, the most terrible player on the field by any means. I think he was just a very solid starting free safety for you. So he could become an AP guy as well, especially if he takes another step forward year 2 in Joe Witt Jr.'s system. And then starting wide receiver. Look, Terry McLaurin, he's an AP guy waiting to happen, right? Like he's got to get extended, right? If the Cincinnati Bengals can find a way to extend Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, the Washington Commanders can certainly find a way to extend Terry McLaurin. So I think Terry McLaurin, while he is on this list right now, he's an AP guy waiting to happen. Then you got depth players, depth offensive line. Again, Andrew Wiley, I basically consider him an AP guy because of that reworked deal. But even if you don't look at Andrew Wiley, Chris Paul is a depth guy who isn't likely to compete for a starting job or even maintain his depth for a certain amount of time. So look for some depth O-line help. Depth edge to replace Andre Jones Jr., who appeared in 2 games last year. But again, if you're going to continue ushering out previous players, or players from the previous regime, Andre Jones Jr. would be a candidate. Depth safety, other depth safeties like Jeremy Reeves, Tyler Owens are on the squad. So you don't have as big a need here, right? But Percy Butler and Quan Martin are both kind of in this category. This one specifically is Percy Butler. And then we mentioned Cole Turner, depth tight end. Right now, Cole Turner is the 5th tight end in line behind Zach Ertz, John Bates, Ben Sinnott, and Colson Yankoff. So you're not looking to spend premium draft capital to replace Cole Turner. So that's basically kind of how we're going to break this down. And as we go through the NFL draft, that doesn't mean we're just boom, best starting running back or best running back on the board coming off, best DT on the board coming off. No, we still got to make our decisions, still got to be a little bit judicious here. And we're not just going to draft guys to replace players. They got to also fit what the Washington Commanders are trying to do. So let's get into the fun part of this now, the mock draft coming up, all 7 rounds, including a couple of trades and one AP era guy who also may be getting shipped out based on our mock. We're having some fun here at the end of March, so stay with us right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money can come in to help you out and become your personal chief financial officer, your CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just another budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building your wealth. I've been using it now for a couple of weeks. And when I started using Monarch Money, I realized just how much food I was spending on some things where I could really afford to cut back on, which is really important because I'm about to take a week-long trip down to Florida for NFL league meetings next week or over this weekend into next week. So I definitely need to make sure that my budget is locked down tight. Take control of your finances like I did with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. And we're doing that thanks to FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It's March, So March Madness is here and it's in full effect, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers to FanDuel, you can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who is cutting down the nets. On Thursday, we've got a lineup here. Arkansas, 5.5 point underdogs to the 3rd seed Texas Tech Raiders. BYU, 4.5 point underdogs to Alabama. And then on Friday, you got some more intriguing matchups. And of course, upsets are always around the corner. BYU, 91-89 over the 3rd seed Wisconsin Badgers. Already an upset there. The Michigan Wolverines, 91-79, upsetting the Texas A&M Aggies. And then, of course, number 10, Arkansas, toppling number 2 St. John's by a final score of 75-66. So we've already got a good amount of upsets, and you've got even more upsets coming during this tournament. So get in on the fun. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Continuing now is today's episode of Locked On Commanders. So we've set the stage for our outside the box Ron Rivera era. I would rather say pre-Adam Peters era player replacement mock draft. That's kind of how we're angling this thing here. And we're going to start off in the first round, right? Pick number 29. I don't think a trade up is really in the cards. You know, we talked about, again, last mailbag episode, I got asked the question of, you know, who are some of the players in this draft that you could see worth a trade up for the Washington Commanders? And there are some players that would be worth it. But when you look at how much draft capital Adam Peters has already spent this offseason, you're much more likely to see a trade back or just stick and pick if the right player is there than you are a trade up. Trading up, obviously, you're going to give up even more draft capital. So I just don't know if it's really in the cards. Now, what's interesting about this, right, is that the Ravens actually take running back Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina with the 27th pick. So if the Washington Commanders get wind that the Ravens might be doing this at 27, maybe they call up the team at 26, say, hey, look, we'll jump up a couple of spots with you, 3 spots with you. And I don't know, maybe they work a deal to where it's a player, not a draft pick, and you move up. I'll be honest with you. Once we got past a certain point, I was kind of like, okay, Omarion Hampton is probably going to be there for us, number 29. And I kind of just sat back and from the controls. I was like, all right, we can just chill. I was a little bit surprised to see him go at 27, but that's where he went. So we've got to respond here. So looking at our needs for our replacement draft and looking at who's on the board, the top running back on the board right now, Ohio State's Quinshon Judkins, who's been going around 20 picks later than where we are right now, but he's still a top back. The top defensive tackle is Derrick Harmon from the Oregon Ducks. The top free safety is Xavier Watts, who again is about 20 picks too early at this point in time. So we are going to take defensive tackle Derrick Harmon out of Oregon, 6'4.5", 313-pound defensive tackle, played in 4 games as a freshman at Michigan State. So he's got experience throughout his collegiate career, then 12 or more starts in each of his last 3 seasons, including 14 in 2024 alone for the Oregon Ducks. Wide body guy who's strong at the point of attack, can clog holes, not going to be a big sack guy, right? But he can generate pressure with power in the right matchups, be part of a pass rush package, not necessarily specifically by himself. Played up and down the line all throughout his career, so he's got that versatility. One NFL executive, according to Lance Zierlein's draft profile of Harmon on NFL.com, they quoted one NFL executive saying he reminds him of a bigger Cam Hayward, and that is a very good thing. So Derrick Harmon coming in there to help stack up the defensive tackle. So again, defensive tackle wasn't our first priority in this replacement draft on the needs list, but because of the talent available, we do go and replace that position first. Now we get back on the clock at number 61, and the best running back on the board right now is Ohio State's TreVeyon Henderson. The top safety is Texas's Andrew Makuba. The top receiver is Trey Harris out of Ole Miss, and the top overall player is offensive tackle Donovan Jackson from Ohio State. And before the trade for Laramie Tunsil, this would have been very, very intriguing to me. Offensive tackle Donovan Jackson, very good player. Certainly would have been very tempting to go back to the trenches. I really like Makuba as well, the safety out of Texas. So his being there is really intriguing too. But given our need to replace previous regime players, we're going to go TreVeyon Henderson for Ohio State and start looking for a trade partner potentially for Brian Robinson Jr. Not that we're reaching for need, right? The running back need is higher than our safety need, but TreVeyon Henderson, Andrew Makuba, kind of neck and neck in value for me right now. the running back is the bigger need, so that's why it works out and it wins out. TreVeyon Henderson is 5'10", 202 pounds, top athleticism score of all the running backs at the NFL Scouting Combine this year. So you got to enjoy that if you're a Commanders fan. Ran a 4.43 40-yard dash, significantly faster than Brian Robinson's 4.53. Now, he's had a lot of carries in his NFL or his collegiate career, TreVeyon has, but he did split time later in his career with Quinshon Judkins, who in this mock draft goes ahead of TreVeyon. So perhaps that'll extend his health and the life cycle of this running back a little bit. 1,000-yard rusher in 2 of his 4 collegiate seasons. Not a fully polished running back, so keeping Brian Robinson while using Henderson as a role player to develop along as they go could still be in the cards, right? Not a guarantee that you're just going to ship Brian Robinson out here. In fact, we could actually keep an eye out for an Austin Ekeler trade as we move forward. 3rd round, we're starting to get some interest for trades involving Daron Payne here. Not so much from the running backs, but we do have some teams sniffing around Daron Payne, and ultimately it's the Chicago Bears who jump up. They give us number 72 for Daron Payne straight up. So we give up Payne. He's going to rejoin Montez Sweat there in Chicago. We will see Daron Payne come back with the Chicago Bears at some point in the 2025 season, so that'll be interesting. And at number 72, the top player on the board is not one of the top players in our replacement draft because there are no pre-AP era cornerbacks that need replaced right now if they are going in that direction. But Benjamin Morrison, cornerback out of Notre Dame, is a very interesting prospect at number 72. So looking at our replacement needs, we still got to find a starting free safety. Wide receiver technically is still on the board because of Terry McLaurin, even though, again, he is going to be an AP guy at some point. So we are still looking there. Top coverage safety is still Andrew Makuba out of Texas. Top receiver is Jalen Noel out of Iowa State. It's really tough for me because Morrison isn't on our replacement list, but he's a really good talent and he could be useful either this year or next. But he's also coming off of a season-ending hip injury. And I looked, but I could not find any significant updates on that injury recovery. If I knew more about his health situation, I might go there. But with that question mark unsure right now, I'm going to go with the receiver Jalen Noel out of Iowa State, not to replace Terry McLaurin. Obviously, that's ridiculous. But you now have Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Noah Brown, Jalen Noel, Luke McCaffrey, and Michael Gallup. That's a really good stable of receivers. Noel and McCaffrey bring up return ability. Wouldn't be surprised to see the team try Gallup out as a return man as well. He doesn't really have a history there, but you know what I mean? Guys in his situation, they're kind of just going to go out there and see what they can do. So we get him with pick number 72. Come back in the 4th round. Here's where we're going to get a little bit even more outside of the box. Everybody's pretty much been talking about the potential of Daron Payne being traded, but with TreVeyon Henderson now on board, and we got a new return guy, Luke McCaffrey did pretty good as a kick returner himself. I'm actually looking to move Austin Ekeler and keep Brian Robinson for the last year of his rookie deal. And I'm starting to get some nibbles, some interest in the early part of the 4th round. Eventually, the Saints offer me 112 overall for Austin Ekeler straight up, and I take that deal. So we get number 112. We save about $3 million in the salary cap by trading Austin to New Orleans. Still need a potential safety at the top of our list of replacement needs. The top cover safety right now is Virginia's Jonas Sanker. However, looking at our O-line depth, our top guy there is Miami of Florida, Miami Hurricanes tackle Jalen Rivers, massive right tackle prospect. Doesn't really seem to fit the mold of what AP wants. So he wants guys a little bit more athletic. Jalen Rivers not really viewed as that guy. Cincinnati guard Luke Kendra is the top interior offensive line. Grades really well. So if we go O-line, we're probably going to go with Kendra, but really not in love with him here either. Looking at the edge depth in our replacement drafts, Alabama's Quandarius Robinson is there. He's kind of a tweener, not really versatile, right? So you've got 2 words here, tweener and versatile. Guys who can do a little bit of multiple things and do them well. Those are guys that are versatile. Guys who can do a little bit of things or a little bit of multiple things because we don't really know if he's good anywhere. They're called tweeners. Quandarius Robinson is a tweener. This team hasn't had a whole lot of success with Alabama defensemen turning into what they thought they would. I'm not saying we never go there, but for right now, that kind of is gonna hinder that there. Now, a couple of intriguing prospects near the top of the board, not necessarily on this top of the list. Linebacker Jeffrey Bassa out of Oregon and UCLA edge Oluwafemi Oladejo. Femi Oladejo is what he goes by. He goes by Femi. Oluwafemi is how you say his first name, but a lot of people call him Femi Oladejo. And in fact, insider Dr. Wonderful has actually been asking me about him earlier this week. So interestingly enough, with this trade, we get on the board in the range where Femi Oladejo has been going in these mock drafts. Now, Bassa, the Oregon linebacker, former safety turned linebacker, so we know the Commanders like that. Very aggressive, but he does lack some athleticism. Known as a leader at Oregon, played in 13 or more games every year in college, So a very solid prospect. Now you look at Femi Oladejo, and he's an interesting prospect because he's a linebacker turned edge, very solid run defender. That's key. Plays very aggressive. He attacks blockers really well. Does need some refinement, but in the early 4th round, you're okay taking a guy that needs refinement. Also of note, Dan Quinn and Adam Peters were both at UCLA's Pro Day this year. So we're going to go edge here. We're going to go with Femi Oladejo, and we've now traded Daron Payne. We traded Austin Ekeler, so we're basically done with trades there. But we've got another 4th round pick coming via Houston in the Laramie Tunsil trade. So at number 128, we're still looking for a safety, O-line, and tight end. And our top player on the board is Cal cornerback Noel Williams. So that is where we're going to go. Noel Williams, 6 foot tall, 199 pounds. He's out length, 14 career interceptions. He's good at a press man coverage, good cover 3 corner, which is a scheme or a style of coverage that the Commanders like to play really well. Could be more physical in press. Isn't a great tackler. So you don't love that, right? Tackling has been a big issue for this team. But again, 4th round pick, developmental guy. As long as the willingness to try to tackle is there, which it looks like it is, you can work on him with some of the intangibles. So we go off the list there. Again, no corners, but we get one because he just seems to fit what the Washington Commanders are trying to do here in the late part of the 4th round. No 5th round picks. We go to the 6th, still looking safety, lineman, and tight end. Pick 205, we're going safety, Keaton Crawford out of Nevada by way of Texas. A lot of athleticism, a lot of willingness to play hard. Kind of a Jeremy Reeves-ish type of player. So we're not sure he's a direct Percy Butler replacement candidate, but we do like that we're going to add him to the depth chart. And then in the 7th round, we're going with linebacker Kane Medrano out of UCLA. So that is our mock draft. Who did we replace? Who still needs to be replaced if we are, in fact, intending to replace everybody? That coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, taking a look at the mock draft through the lens of continuing to replace pre-Adam Peters era players with new players to bring in Adam Peters era players to the roster. This team has continued to replace previous players or players who were previously part of this team before the arrival of Adam Peters. And in this mock draft, we go back through this class here. Derrick Harmon, 1st pick overall for us, 29th pick overall in the NFL draft out of Oregon. Eventually, we move on from Daron Payne via trade, send him to the Chicago Bears to get a 3rd round pick straight up. So there's a 1-for-1 replacement there on the depth chart. You're basically looking at Derrick Harmon and a combination of either Johnny Newton and Javon Kinlaw, or we'll see who wins that battle come training camp. 2nd pick, 2nd round overall, TreVeyon Henderson. Ideally, or based on the theory of this mock draft, you would say he's coming in here to replace Brian Robinson Jr., but in actuality, he replaces Austin Ekeler, more of a 3rd down back, certainly a good blocker. TreVeyon Henderson is certainly a capable runner, but a guy who does need some experience, needs some more reps. So we keep the younger Brian Robinson Jr. We move Austin Ekeler for an eventual 4th round pick to the New Orleans Saints. You bring in TreVeyon Henderson to step in front of Jeremy McNichols in that depth chart, play that role with Brian Robinson Jr. Chris Rodriguez Jr. is in there as well to compete with Jeremy for those 3rd back reps. And then in 2026, look, if TreVeyon takes a step forward, maybe you let Brian Robinson walk in free agency, hoping to get some compensatory pick consideration for 2027, or he does well enough and isn't greedy enough that you go ahead and bring him back and you have your 2-headed monster there, and Brian Robinson and TreVeyon Henderson, a younger duo than Brian Robinson and Austin Ekeler. So, that's not a report, right? There's no smoke there that I'm trying to signal you to, just an idea as they kind of got born from this mock draft. And I do want to be clear here as we talk about this. This is in no way, shape, or form me saying the Commanders need to trade Daron Payne. They need to trade Austin Ekeler. It's born from a mailbag question about how this team is continuing to replace pre-Adam Peters era players. So I thought it'd be fun to take a little bit of a mock draft angle with that as well. 3rd pick, Jalen Noel, wide receiver out of Iowa State. A lot of athleticism. I'm not going to replace Terry McLaurin clearly, but he could bring return opportunities. And again, Deebo Samuel on one side, Jalen Noel on the other side in the screen game. It just kind of writes itself. It's a headache for any defense to try to cover if he can kind of continue to be the guy. Deebo Samuel on one guy, or on one side alone is a nightmare. So you put him and a guy like Noel with his athleticism on the other side. Very, very interesting. 4th pick, 4th round, pick number 112 overall, edge rusher Femi Oladejo out of UCLA. 1-for-1 swap with Andre Jones Jr., but this is a guy who's going to get reps, right? He's going to get work. He is still a work in progress himself, a linebacker converted to edge. Again, Washington Commanders brass was on campus for the UCLA Pro Day. Doesn't necessarily mean they're targeting a UCLA player, but it doesn't not mean they're not targeting a UCLA player. Fifth overall pick for us, 4th round, 128, cornerback Noel Williams out of Cal. He wasn't a guy that was necessarily on the board for needing to replace somebody, but he does seem to fit the Washington Commanders mentality, fits something that they do need. Certainly is get some cornerback depth in there. We'll see what happens with Marshawn Lattimore, see what happens with Jonathan Jones and these other guys, and maybe Noel Williams can carve himself out a nice little path toward being a starter in a couple of years. 6th round, 205, Keaton Crawford, more of a Jeremy Reeves-ish type of player to me. But, we're talking about bringing a safety in and potentially bringing a safety out in Percy Butler. And then finally, linebacker Caden Medrano, known for his leadership, played a lot of football at UCLA. Certainly a guy who can come in there along with Jordan McGee and be good depth, special teams player, and maybe develop into something a little bit better. So who didn't we replace from the pre-AP era players? Well, wide receiver Terry McLaurin, clearly because he should soon enough be an AP era player with a new contract. Offensive line, we didn't go there. Again, I kind of consider Andrew Wiley an AP guy now that he's gotten his contract we worked for this year. Chris Paul, not an AP guy. Chris Paul is a guy that you could probably bring in competition for through UDFAs and all that stuff. If you find the right one, could come in and give Chris Paul a run for his money for a roster spot here in the summer. Tight end Cole Turner, he's already the 5th tight end on the depth charts. So, unless he comes in with a whole lot more blocking talent than he has in the past, you probably bring a UDFA to come in and compete against him. And then Quan Martin, we didn't get a competitor for him, but he is under contract through 2026. Again, in my opinion, was a solid player, not an all-pro player, but not a bad player by any means. And I certainly think that he made some quality plays for Joey Jr.'s defense. So not super worried about having to replace him this year. If things don't progress or if he takes a step backwards even in 2025, then we might revisit that position come 2026. So that is this week's mock draft. Coming up tomorrow, we'll talk more about what's going on around the Washington Commanders as we get up to about a month out now from the NFL draft. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, all you got to do is text them to me and you can inspire an episode just like this one. Become an insider. You'll get text from me. You'll also send text to me. Go join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to do that today. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez as they get you ready with all the draft rankings, rumors, and news every single day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through every day. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.